Prosecutors in Maryland and Virginia, who are battling to be the first to try the sniper, said they would announce new charges today. Maryland is likely to win because the men were nabbed at a highway rest stop in Myersville, Maryland. As the rampage came to an end, the general sigh of relief was almost audible across the Washington street. "I'm not looking over my shoulder anymore," said a grinning Dwight Hayes, 34, of suburban Maryland.
Our schools are safe. The following Monday morning, they shot a kid on his way into school.
And so on the crime scene at Tasker Middle School in Bowie, Maryland, most people were searching where the vast majority of witnesses said they heard the sound, this wooded area across the street from the high school. The U.S. Marshal shows up. I believe he's a former Marine too, combat experience. He gets on the scene there and he said, you know, if I was going to take this shot based on where the blood pool is and where the backpack, because by the time he got there 90 minutes after the shooting, the victim had already been taken to the hospital and was in surgery. But he saw where the victim was and he said, you know, if that was me taking the shot, I'd be in the woods over here, not over there. So he took his dog, a black lab, into the woods and started just doing a grid pattern. And a dog can smell things you can't even imagine the sense of smell that a regular dog has. And when I talk in a minute about bloodhounds are astronomically better than any other dog breed at smelling. So this dog, though, is trained on looking only for explosives. That's what he was on the hunt for. So they did a grid pattern, moving this way through the woods. And at one point, they come to a log about 15 or 20 yards into the woods with a clear line of sight to where the victim was shot. And at that log, the dog goes to one end of the log, the other end of the log, the other end of the log, the other end of the log, back and forth. And that's known as bracketing. And it's bracketing the scent. It's not bracketing the log. It's saying the scent goes to here and ends. And then the dog walks the other way, the scent goes to here and ends. And then the dog is trying to figure out where the strongest scent is, and then he stops. And so now he tells his handler, what you're looking for, if it's explosives, is right here. Dog handler pulls his dog away. The other investigators come in, sweep the area, find the shell casing right there. So that dog smelled the explosive residue on a small .223 shell casing. And right beside the shell casing was the tarot card note. And what's important about that is it provided evidence to Fitz, Jimmy over in the BAU, because it had language, it had communication. It was an attempt to communicate, but it also provided other information, and that was human scent. So we had DNA and fingerprint analysis being done on the tarot card and the shell casing, and then both of those pieces of evidence are vacuumed through a specific scent collection vacuum, which sucks air around that item and through a very fine gauze. And now that gauze would contain whatever human scent of anybody that was in contact with or close proximity to these things. We can't see it, we can't test to prove it's there, but what we do then on another crime scene, which is the Ponderosa Steakhouse about a week later, is we take those scent pads, present them to an FBI bloodhound. Now that bloodhound was named Lucy. Her handler was Billy Kiff, a Long Beach, California police officer who was assigned to the FBI. He presents the scent pad from one of those items, the shell casing or the tarot card, and the dog gives him a negative response. There's nothing here, I don't smell that scent. He presents the other scent pad, and the dog makes a beeline directly across a parking lot to a section of the woods nobody had looked in yet, and finds the most important.
Well, let's break down these crime scenes, because the evidence that you found at those crime scenes was very instructive. And Fitz and I were at the BAU, and we were begging the Montgomery County Police Department for a copy of the tarot card. And they literally, because on it said, do not release to the press. They didn't want to give it to the FBI in fear that we were going to release it to the press. And so for 4 days, we're arguing with them that literally we need to see that. And finally, we did get to see it. And I remember we were in the room and we were assessing it, and Fitz had some amazing insights from it. But the first thing that it said on the top of both sides of the card, it said, call me God. And we had told Moose that we believed that the sniper had a God complex, and this reinforced it. I think after that, he started to listen to us a little bit more. And then on the back, it said, this is for you, Mr. Police. Code, call me God. And then it said, do not release to the press. So Fitz, what did you determine from those, what is it, 19 words?
Yeah, 19 words total. But the first thing I wanted to do is, I was not familiar with the world of tarot or the belief system, the concept of tarot. So I looked up, what does death card mean? And quite frankly, I thought, all right, death card means someone's going to die. I was wrong. That's why I looked things up. And it means a transition in life. It means a change. You could be getting a new job, and the death card could sort of be a predictor of that, if you believe in that concept. So whoever the person or persons were at this point in time that chose this card to put their little 19-word message on it, I already knew they weren't subscribing or advocates, whatever, of the tarot belief system. They took it as something else, literal death, which of course tarot doesn't mean that. Then I broke down the particular cards, and they were actually trifurcated, so singular, but just I had a copy of the front and a copy of the back. We never saw the original card. They wouldn't dare let us do that, but that's okay. The lab should handle that. So we had photocopies of it, front and back, and trifurcated on the back, 3 little different sections, and Jim basically put in there or mentioned what it was about. And I wound up writing a 4.5-page report based on my linguistic analysis of those 19 words.
Jim likes to use words, if you haven't noticed.
I'm talking, Jim.
His middle name is not verbosity, just so you know.
It's succinct. Anyway, so yeah, we did. I had some other. We had a couple ATF agents in the room that were helping us, and we wound up putting this 4.5-page report together. And the bottom line is, I opined at the end of the report, there are indicators of an older person, indicators of a youthful person, the use of the word press as opposed to media, which is press being a more archaic term in English language. We all know what it means, but media is more popular even then in 2002. The fact that Mr. Police, I was a former police officer. I know so is Tim. I've been called a lot of things, never Mr. Police. Me either. And we've discussed this before, but I did some research. It's sort of an island thing or Caribbean thing, almost a term of deference. And they could have said a lot of worse things, and I've worked cases where I've been called a lot worse things. So here's Mr.
Why don't you tell us what those things are, Jim?
That's for the next audio entity. So the point is, a lot of information is contained in language, and in those 19 words, we wound up coming up with, we have sort of a youthful, older person dichotomy. I wish I was, brave enough then to say we have 2 people, one older, one younger, but the language is suggestive of someone perhaps maybe wrote the card over a few hours or even a few days, and also a reference, a referential aspect towards law enforcement and perhaps even a Caribbean connection. So that's what I listed in the report, and that's when we went in the room a little bit later that day, Jim, things that we're putting out there.
All of which you'll remember is now true. It's now known, but at that time, these were estimations based on his grasp of human written language and the study of forensic linguistics, and you can see how important profiling is because he nailed it.
But as the case moved on, and as these 23 days of terror and 23 days of error on certain people's part moved on, there was more and more jurisdictions that got pulled into this. It started in Maryland, went down the second day. Tim and I arrived at the Fredericksburg Michaels store right outside the Spotsylvania Mall at exactly the same time. We pulled into parking spaces right next to each other and looked over and saw each other. We were surprised, but we shouldn't have been, because that mall and where we were parking right there was almost equidistant between where we lived. We lived very close by, and we responded to the scene. And unfortunately, when we talked to the sheriff and I asked him, well, what did the witnesses say? And he said, there were no witnesses. And I said, there are 3,000 cars in this parking lot. There must have been probably 300 people coming and going to their cars at the moment of the shot. Somebody must have seen something. And I know Maureen was a very experienced forensic person in the FBI on the evidence response team. How would you have handled that?
Looking for witnesses?
Yeah, witnesses and evidence at that time.
I would have asked the police to block off the choke points and start asking everybody. I would look for CCTV, which there wasn't a whole lot at that time, obviously, if any. And I would,
Grid search, right?
yeah, we would do a grid search. I would look for pretty much what you described about the Marine that saw the pool of blood at the school and sort of reverse engineer it back to where you thought that shot would come from, knowing that it most probably was a sniper shot,
Right.
especially if people didn't see it.
So the sheriff did tell us one thing. He said that there was one witness, but he's a liar. And I said, well, tell me what he said. He said, well, he's a 19-year-old guy, and he's lied to us before. He uses drugs and stuff. I don't believe him. And he said, I said, well, what did he tell you? And he said, well, some black guy with an afro in a dark sedan. He said, that peeled out afterwards, and that's where the shot came from. And I said, great, did you put out the APB? And he said, yeah, I put it out on the white van that Chief Moose told us about. I was like, damn. So I got my metal detector out. I started doing a grid search. I found a 223. I looked at, at the back of the van. The bullet had gone through the torso of the woman who was shot that day and went into the back of her van. And I looked at the angle of that. I sighted a sign, about 1,000 yards away to give me a line of sight, and I started doing a grid search. And 87 strides away from that van in that exact direction, I found a 223 shell casing, which is consistent with the weapon they were using. They were never able to actually tie that to the case, but just having that there at a crime scene that was never searched is just not how the FBI would have done it. And so what I decided at that point was, I think that this is strategic. I believe that the sniper, whoever he is strategically picking small town jurisdictions around Washington, D.C., which happens to be the biggest media outlet in the world, so that he would get the attention, but not have to go head to head with the FBI.
Back to the tarot card for a minute. It said, don't release to the press, but as you know, we all know, it was. In fact, it was Mike Buchanan from Channel 9 who actually got the tip, broke the story. And I think he actually got the language on the tarot card wrong initially.
Who was his source?
I have no idea. Mike's
Probably still
retired now.
leaking somewhere out there today.
But I do recall very clearly going to a news conference the day that he broke that story, and Chief Moose was furious, of course, and said if Channel 9 wants to investigate this case, they can, but we're investigating it, not Channel 9. And rightly so, he was furious because now they're saying don't release it, but it's out there. How did when you guys in law enforcement see something like that? I'm just curious your reaction to that. When here's something they're saying, don't tell us what we're telling you, and yet it gets out.
Well, there's a couple of things. One is, what's their stated intention and what's their actual intention? And so we don't like when the media contradicts what law enforcement is asking them to do, because people were losing their lives. This is not about news. This is about saving lives. However, I fully believe that they wanted this out to the press. I think they wanted to have as much press as possible, which is why they were doing what they were doing, where they were doing it. But at the same time, we didn't know all of that at the time. So it was a risky thing for Channel 9 to do, especially since it was a demand by somebody who was killing people. But at the same time, I don't believe that they really wanted that.
If I can just add, and you brought it up quickly, Paul, but of course the card said, call me God. Somebody transposed a pronoun for a verb, and it was actually I am God is what went out to the media. And it was interesting watching CNN and the other cable channels that night, bringing in theologians and religious dogma experts explaining what it means when someone says, I am God, and I'm watching it. I'm saying to myself, it's call me God, good. Whoever gave up this information, he or she was obviously removed from the actual seeing the card and got it wrong. It's hard to believe those things happen, but the point is they had it wrong the whole time, but all these theologians were getting called out of academia and out of their pulpits to come on TV and render opinions about words that weren't even correct as they were assessing it.
It was a God complex. It wasn't theological at all.
Well, I just remember when that story came out, it was chilling. We didn't know what was happening. And here's somebody saying, call me God, with a tarot card. I just remember being really fearful at that
point. It was
point.
definitely a threat. I mean, even if they misinterpreted what the meaning behind the death tarot card was, it was intended as a threat. And anybody who was here in the audience who lived in the area should know. But if you weren't, everybody was terrorized. People were dying doing the everyday things that they did. Going to work, sitting on a bus at the bench, cutting their grass, going to school, pumping gas, going to the grocery store, going to Home Depot. The things that everybody did every day to go about their normal lives, people were getting brutally murdered. And the saddest thing, and you'll hear about this if you listen to Call Me God, is that some of the people that died were told by their significant others, their families, be careful, get away from that area, and so forth. Tim, why don't you tell them about the guy who pulled up to the gas station?
There was a man named Kenneth Bridges, 53-year-old African-American businessman from Philadelphia. On October 11th, 2002, he was driving from a business meeting, I believe down in North Carolina, returning to Philadelphia. And he had, of course, seen on the news everything that was happening in the Washington, D.C. area with the DcSnipers. And he contacted his wife, who was terrified because going north up Interstate 95, you very closely drive to where some of these crime scenes were. And he told his wife on the phone, don't worry, I'm not going anywhere near DC. I'm stopping way down here in Massaponax. I'm going to get gas. I'll be home in Philly in 2 or 3 hours. Those were the last words he spoke to his wife. He pulled up to a gas pump at the Exxon gas station right off Interstate 95. Massaponax is on the south side of Fredericksburg. The shooting the week prior happened about 7 or 8 miles north of there, but he thought he was safe because he was further south. At that gas pump, he was killed, shot in the chest one time, died right there. Father of 6 kids, businessman, community leader, died. And 10 minutes before or so, when he was at that gas pump, I found out a few minutes later, because I called my wife and told her to stay away from the area. She told me she just left that area. In fact, she just left that gas station. And in fact, she was at that same gas pump, pumping gas with 4 of my little kids in our white Chevy van, just getting gas, doing normal everyday activities. She happened to be at the wrong place, but thankfully at the right time. Ken Bridges showed up 10 or 15 minutes later, and it was the wrong time.
Which means she was probably in his crosshairs, or they were at least looking at her. And, you know, these snipers will lie in wait and they'll try to find the good shot, the perfect shot. They don't want to fail. They have the God complex. And there's Tim's wife, who had how many kids in the van at the time, which is why she wasn't standing still. And that's what saved her life.
Yeah, and as profilers, we're looking at victimology of the victims so far, and they're all across the board. I remember someone saying there were no Asian fatalities up to a certain point. I'm not sure if there ever were. And we're saying, geez, maybe someone was saying maybe the person's Asian, but they want to take every other race or ethnicity out. The only thing I'll add to that, and of course that wasn't accurate, and the only thing I'll add to that is here we are, FBI agents, we're carrying our weapons, but I have to go and shop and get stuff at the supermarket. I'm putting gas in my car. I remember in the supermarket, I was going back into history, how the battleships and the destroyers in World War II would have to zigzag to avoid, the German submarines. I would walk from my car and I would zigzag back and forth. I said, this guy may still get me with his long rifle, but I'm not going to make it easy for him. I'd make a left here and a right here, and pumping gas, I'd be down on my knees, and you felt funny doing it. And some gas stations put up some big tarps, so they would not offer the ready target acquisition. So it was a scary time, even if you're carrying a gun yourself, because you were basically outgunned, but someone could hit you from a few hundred yards away.